Go.
Welcome to the PRCA's podcast Fuse, the global podcast for PR, marketing, and comms professionals. Our special guest today is Sathnam Sanghera. Sathnam, welcome.
Welcome. We're matched, aren't we? You're wearing the same colours.
Yeah, we are twinning today. Now, I'm going to just let the audience know a little bit about your history. I've been very privileged to know you over the years and watch your incredible journey from the sidelines. Now, Sathnam Sanghera was born to Punjabi parents in the West Midlands in 1976. He entered the education system unable to speak English, but after attending Wolverhampton Grammar School, graduated from Christ College in Cambridge with a first-class degree in English language and literature. He has been shortlisted for the Costa Board Awards twice, book awards, and his memoir, The Boy With The Topknot, and his novel Marriage Material. The former being adapted by the BBC drama in 2017 and named Mind Book of the Year 2009. His third book, Empireland, which I love, absolutely love, how imperialism has shaped modern Britain, has become an instant Sunday Times bestseller on release in 2021. And it was named Book of the Year in 2022 British Book Awards and resulted in Empire State of Mind, the acclaimed two-part documentary for Channel 4, for which he earned a Best Presenter shortlisting at the Grierson Awards. My God, Sathnam. And on top of that, I mean, what I've also missed is your journalism. So I wanted to start off, Sathnam, with just understanding a little bit about your typical day in your life. How do you juggle so much? You've got your writing, you've got your books and your podcast and production and your speaking gigs. So what does a typical day in Sathnam's life look like?
Well, everyone always says there's no such thing as a typical day, right? There's no such thing as a typical day. I mean, today I was doing some journalism, so I was up at 6 a.m., went all the way to Kent to interview this amazing entrepreneur for the Times. In the last few weeks, I've been traveling a lot. So I went to Utah, then I went to Bali for the literature festival there. I've been making a radio documentary. I'm working on 2 books, an adult book and a kid's book. And actually, those different kinds of books are written very differently. But my favorite days are the ones when I'm just writing, where I wake up at 8 o'clock. Actually, I should say 7:30. And I start writing by 9, and I pretty much keep writing until around 6, although the quality of the writing falls. So I do my best writing in the morning, and then I tend to concentrate on editing and rewriting and reading.
And how do you deal with interruptions? Because I read somewhere that if you have an interruption, then cognitively it affects your thinking for about 20 minutes. And so if you have sort of interruptions every 20 minutes in your life, like a lot of us PR people do, you end up always slightly cognitively impaired. So when you're writing, do you basically have a go at everyone around you and say, do not interrupt me, turn off your phone, your notifications?
No, I'm the opposite, actually. I think I grew up in a very loud household, and I didn't have my own bedroom. So I'm used to being interrupted. I quite like it. So I work with music. I actually work with hip hop playing in the background. I interrupt myself all the time. I mean, I respond to emails almost instantly or never. It's only one of 2 speeds. And so I quite like the interruptions. I'm probably very unproductive as a result.
And what about news? Obviously, you've spent many years working as a journalist. How do you keep on top of the news? Because actually, you could dedicate your entire waking life to just reading all of the sort of social media alerts and going in all the different media outlets, let alone podcasts. How do you keep abreast of what's happening without it consuming your hours?
Yeah, I realized that actually one really good thing is apps. If you get the newspapers delivered like I used to, you spend 2 or 3 hours reading them. You can't help it. So now I go through the Times, FT, Guardian apps, and I go through them quite quickly, and that stops me dwelling on stories too long. And also, I'm cutting. I mean, there's so much social media, isn't there? But I'm trying to reduce it to just one. I think Blue Sky is winning at the moment.
It really is. Especially in PR world, there's been this massive exodus in the last week or two, and it's really quite exciting. Hopefully, it will be a good space. Now, the Japanese, they have a concept for purpose called ikigai. If you look back on your career from when you were a boy, you studied English lit, you went into journalism and then books. And so the sort of consistent theme is storytelling. So what's your propellant? What keeps you focused on storytelling? What keeps you motivated? What's so important for you?
I guess, I come from a household where there are no books, where no one had gone to university, there wasn't intellectual discussion. So for me, writing is a way of kind of existing. It's like not only were we working class, I felt like in so many ways, with my father and my sister with schizophrenia, and I was working in a factory from a very young age. We were almost the underclass. Didn't really exist in the eyes of society. So for me, when I started writing for newspapers, it was a way to say, a way to feel that I mattered and I existed. So I think that has always motivated me. But also, I think there's something else about, I really do believe, and I think it partly goes to the foundations of Sikhism. I really do believe in equality. I mean, one of the founding principles of Sikhism is that everyone's the same. You know, I think Guru Nanak said something along the lines of, "If you believe that every human is equal, you are religious." That for me is religion, and that for me motivates me in many ways.
And there's also a strong concept of public service in Sikhism as well.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. I mean, lots of people would say I'm not a proper Sikh because I cut my hair, and I don't want to get into all of that. I think you can make your own kind of religion, and I think that's another great thing about Sikhism is that in a way you have your own relationship with your faith. And yeah, for me, you're right. For me, service is a big part of it.
And so you said that you had quite a difficult childhood in the sense that you were working in factories from a young age. You didn't have the privilege that other children growing up in households where they talk about sort of current affairs, and it becomes a much more sort of accessible industry to go into journalism. You said that you wanted to write because you wanted to be seen. Was that because you felt invisible or sort of sidelined?
Not consciously,
Yeah.
but I think I was motivated by that. Yeah, absolutely. And it's odd because I was a massive introvert. I was a very, very shy kid, and I turned into something the opposite. And I find that actually, when I meet successful people, that's often the case. Because if you're shy and you're introverted, you have to force yourself to solve the problem, and you kind of get addicted to that process, and you learn how to be extroverted and to be public. And so I think I went through that process, but I'm still inclined to, kind of disappear, given a choice.
And did you start writing for like a local newspaper or school newspaper when you were still at school, or was this after you completed your education?
I started very young. I mean, I was writing for my local paper in Wolverhampton when I was 15 or 16. Thankfully, none of that stuff is online because it was utter crap. But yeah, I started very early, and I just thought it was my local paper, but I didn't realize at the time it was one of the most successful newspapers in Britain. It sold, I think it outsold the Evening Standard, and so actually it was a really good base from which to start writing.
And do you worry about the lack of local media opportunities that are out there for the young, because so many of the media outlets have sort of closed down, and it gave you a bit of a stepping stone into that world of journalism that doesn't exist in the sort of abundance that it did when we
I
were
don't
growing
worry about it in terms of opportunities because I think young people now have other opportunities. They can now write on Facebook or blog and or tweet, which I couldn't do. The only way I could write anything was to write for my local paper. What I do worry about is the complete disappearance of the local newspaper industry, and the fact that they went to every council meeting and told us about the corruption and the stories that were happening in our local communities, and all of that has been replaced by Facebook, which is not doing the journalism. So we're missing out on huge news stories all the time.
Do you see a solution to it? Because ultimately, a lot of the advertising budgets have left legacy media and they've moved on to social media platforms. And that's what sustained the teams of journalists who do the fact checking, the verification, and that sort of training and pushing out content within these editorial parameters. And now everyone with a smartphone can tweet and they don't need fact checkers. Any solutions that you see, or do you think it's just an inevitable demise? And
Well, it does seem to be getting worse. I mean, I couldn't believe what's happened to the Evening Standard. I mean, that was an institution going back decades and decades. But there are signs of hope. I mean, I don't know if you've seen Jim Waterson's Substack, and there's journalists who are now filling in the space. So hopefully, it's a sign of a new trend. Filling in the gap.
so I mentioned earlier that you were born into a Punjabi family, and I was actually telling my daughter the other day what it means, Punjab. So 5 rivers. So Punjab also was always this incredible place of agriculture and abundance. How do you think Punjab, being Punjabi specifically, has sort of shaped the way that you approach life?
You know what? I think in probably many ways, but one of the most obvious ways I think is the sense of humor. I guess we didn't have much to laugh about in my family, but I always remember laughter. And my mum is very, very funny. And if you look at all the breakout hits from Punjabi creative people like Bendy, like Beckham, Goodness Gracious Me, Mira Sayal, Sanjeev Bhaskar, Gurinder, all these things, they're all comic. The Kamal's at number 52, right? And I think there's something intrinsic to Punjabi culture that's funny. And I hope there's a thread of humor in my writing. And I think that definitely goes back to the Punjabi tendency to laugh at ourselves.
And then after school, you ended up going to Cambridge. Was that a massive eye opener? Were you quite confident when you walked through the entrance of Cambridge on your first day, or was it quite daunting and you felt a bit out of place?
You know what? Cambridge for me wasn't the big event. For me, going to the Wolverhampton Grammar School changed my life in every possible way. It introduced me to middle class people, to Radio 3, opera, cold soup, all these things that middle class people did. Cambridge felt like an extension of that, and in many ways, it knocked my confidence for a while. I loved school, and I ended up as head boy despite being mute when I first started at school. And when I went to Cambridge, I just found it confusing, socially alienating, and I didn't really get it. I loved the work, but socially it was a non-event. I felt like my social life just was suspended for 3 years, and then as soon as I left, I was back on again. I was myself again. So it was a bit of a strange time, Cambridge.
Do you still have friends from your time at Cambridge?
Yeah, I've only really got two friends from that time. Sad, isn't it? But it would be tragic if they also didn't have a very similar experience.
Yeah.
I think there was something slightly odd about that time and my college at that time.
And then after what happened? So you finished your degree and you had already tasted journalism as a 15-year-old boy, and that interest was sustained throughout your degree. And was your first job after degree working in media?
Yeah, I joined the FT graduate training scheme, and actually because it was a non-event, I did a lot of work. I did a lot of freelancing. Actually, I was freelancing news stories for the Sunday Telegraph whilst I was still at college because
Mhm.
it was good to have an outlet. And but even though I went to this very posh university and I ended up getting an interview at on the FT graduate training scheme, the only reason I got a place on that newspaper is because in the year ahead of me there was a reporter called Gautam Malkani who'd got onto the scheme, and I rang him and he told me every single question they'd asked him, and they asked all the same questions. If I hadn't had that, there's no way I would have got onto the FT. And it just shows you how, even at that level, you still need networks. And this is what people who don't grow up in middle class settings, they don't have that. So how do you break into the media when you don't have those connections?
Do you think it's a little bit easier now because of social media that people can build connections online? Um,
Yeah, and as you know, I chaired for a while a charity, a media charity for creative access, which helped to get people from unconventional backgrounds into the media. And whenever I talk to young people and they'd say, "Oh, I want to work in the media. I'm really passionate about international politics, international affairs, and music and this," and then I'll go, "Okay, let me look at your social media." I'd have a look at their social media, and it would be just memes about cats or something. You're like, there's no hiding now. I'm sorry, but you are not passionate about international affairs if your Twitter is all about animals, you know? And
Yeah.
so I think it's an opportunity, but also a danger for young people. There's no hiding now.
Yeah, absolutely. It really gives that sort of that visibility. Now, when you started working at the FT, were you focused on particular sort of areas or sectors, or were you focused on features that gave you a wide-ranging brief?
It was so, and I think it was the most exciting time of my life working at the FT because I was a news reporter. Then they sent me to America. I did a bit of finance. I wasn't that good at it, so they didn't ask me to do it again. I went from being a news reporter to being a feature writer to standing in for Lucy Calloway and becoming a columnist. And it all happened over 8 years, and it was so exciting. I cannot tell you. But when I first started, I mean, I was so inexperienced. My first feature for the FT, they sent me to the launch of a steam oven. It was literally a steam oven, and they asked me to write it up, and I spent 2 days writing it up, and they published 50 words, 50 words of it. But that was that's how little experience and how untalented I was at the start of it. But by the end, I was writing 3,000 word features for the FT magazine. I mean, it was an amazing experience and amazing journey.
Did you realize quite early on how much power that you were yielding as a tier one journalist?
Tier
Because
one, I've never heard that before.
yeah,
What's that
I
mean?
mean, us PRs, we get, if somebody's like from tier one journalists, like BBC, sort of FT, The Times, New York Times, we actually get really excited. So you're probably constantly having to sort of fight off PRs wherever you go. But it, also from a PR perspective, we look at journalists from sort of tier one outlets, and we sometimes wonder what is it like on the other side. Like, are you aware of the power dynamic? Are you aware
Mm.
of how you go and interview someone and you could quite and with your scribe, you can not quite change their fortunes completely, but you can make a huge impact on them, positive or negative, with your words. Were you aware when you first joined, quite quickly, when you walk in the room, all of a sudden everyone starts sort of being nice to you, and the impact of your articles on people, positive and negative?
Well, they're not always nice. Sometimes they're hostile. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
I
why.
think I was very, very aware of it at the FT because the people who want to be in the FT, businesses, they really want to be in the FT and they really care about what you say. So, and also the FT take themselves very seriously. So there are all sorts of rules about what you could and couldn't say. And it was a very thorough form of journalism. Now I would say, I mainly write for the Times Magazine. And the nice thing about it is that the relationships with the PRs are something that the editors look after. So basically, like today, I was sent to interview this person. I have no idea what the PRs have said to the editors, and I don't have to worry about it. And you can just go into it and be honest. Um, but as I get older, also the thing I really enjoy. I mean, in my 20s, I guess I was quite acerbic, and I probably was really quite mean about some people, and I have apologized to some of those people. Not all of them. Some of them deserved it, but nowadays the thing I love is finding really unusual, amazing people and bigging them up. And like the story I'm doing today, it's just like it's writing an advert for someone, but he's such an amazing guy that it's a pleasure to do it.
And what is it about your time in the FT that gave you that insight for 8 years, that you think that that's a sort of the secret sauce behind the FT? Why does it have so much clout? Why is it so well respected? And you've obviously worked in a number, or you worked in the FT as well as the Times. But what was it quite unique about the culture at the Financial Times that produced
Well,
journalism?
they've got a very serious approach to journalism. Um, they double, triple source things. They generally, you're not going to find a story in the FT that's wrong. So the accuracy has a reputation for that. That means that you get access to people who perhaps wouldn't talk to other newspapers. So the access was amazing. I did all sorts of interviews with people who don't normally do interviews, whether it was Enya, the pop star, or Matthew Freud, the PR, and that was nice. But equally, when I started becoming more wanted to write more creative writing, I found I had to unlearn a lot of that. because writing creatively, even like non-fictional creative, you've got to be less uptight about every sentence. And so I had to slightly unlearn it.
Why did you leave the FT and go to the Times?
Actually, I left the FT originally to just write my memoir, and then I got an offer from the Times from someone I used to work with at the FT. So in a way, I feel like it was James Harding who now runs Tortoise. In a way, I feel like only had one job, in that I went straight from working at the FT to working with FT journalists at the Times.
And how do the cultures differ between the FT and the Times?
Uh, one thing I used to get frustrated with at the FT is that they sometimes have a very intellectual approach to features, and features is where I ended up. So they could be very cerebral, whereas I think the Times magazine and feature section are more fun and creative sometimes, and less uptight, and that's good and bad. But at that time in my life, I wanted to change.
And did you chair the board for Creative Access during your time at the FT, or was it late in your career when you joined the Times?
Oh, it's much later. And now the Creative Access is something different. It's a social enterprise, but it was a charity when I was chairing it. Yeah.
And actually, I met the founder a few days ago, Josie, and she said you
Oh
were.
yeah, no, she's a CEO, not the
Yeah,
founder.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. She was in huge praise for the
Yeah,
time.
you've worked a lot with Creative Access, haven't you?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that they're a fantastic organization. Now, you took some time out to write your memoir, The Boy with the Topknot. Was it quite cathartic writing the memoir, and what kind of compelled you to decide to write quite early on in your career?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really have any ambitions to write books, to be honest, and it was someone else's idea. I was sitting with a publisher who I rejected her suggestion of write a novel, and I was just talking about my life, about how I just found out that my dad had schizophrenia and my sister, and how I'd had this succession of kind of dysfunctional secret relationships, and how it was crushing my will to live. And she was like, you know what, you should write about that. And I started to, and I didn't read. It was an act of incredible naivety. There's no way I would do that now. I think if you've not written a book before, you don't know what's going to happen. It could have ruined my life. It could have totally ended incredibly badly, but it didn't. It all kind of worked out. My family accepted what I said and were on board, and I kind of escaped an arranged marriage, and it was incredible. It all worked out, but I can't believe I did it. It was such a stupid thing to do.
Did you feel quite exposed when the memoir was published and all of a sudden everyone was discussing your life, your upbringing, and some deeply personal aspects of your childhood?
Yeah, it was mad, but because the film came out quite a lot, I think almost 10 years afterwards or 8 years afterwards, it was very slow. So the madness was spread over 8 years, and so it gave me time to develop coping mechanisms. And I think that one of the main things it did is that paradoxically, it made me a very private person. I think you'll never find anyone more private than someone who's written a memoir. And so basically, since then, although people think I share a lot about my life, I actually haven't shared very many details at all. But people have this idea that my life is an open book. Quite the opposite.
So the book, you had control over it in terms of, you had written it yourself. The BBC drama, in a way, you had to sort of give your story to a team of people to bring to life. How much control did you have over it, and did you struggle with letting your baby go? Um,
It was a weird experience. I think I was very unconventional in that I was happy for them to have it, and actually I encouraged them to change as much as possible, because that way it made it easier for me to cope with it. Because then I could say, look, they've changed it. It's not really my life, and so I also like didn't read the script until like 3 weeks before production. Again, I can't believe I did that. I should have read it, but I was so freaked out by like you walk into a room and there's 18 actors, each one of them, or 8 actors, playing a member of your family. and acting out the worst things that ever happened to you in your life. It's a very surreal thing to happen. But one thing I'm grateful for that it was a TV thing, and I think if it's a feature film, they don't disappear. People keep watching them. If it's TV, it's intense, and millions of people watch it for a short time, and then it has slightly gone. Now, I mean, occasionally I get emails, but in generally people don't watch it.
So it clearly gave you a bit of a bug for writing a book, because you then went ahead and did another book, Empire Land. How many years between the two books?
Actually, though, the next book was Marriage Material, my novel, which
Hmm.
was about, I think, about 5 years later.
Yeah.
And I wrote that partly because people kept on asking me about the memoir, and I got tired, and I thought I need to change the subject. But then people thought my novel was just a memoir. I think the title Marriage Material related to the themes of the first one, and
Yeah.
so people get confused. Weirdly, now Marriage Material is being turned into a play, like 10 years later again. Next
Oh,
year, it's going to be on in London,
yeah.
and so that's quite a surreal experience. Yeah, but then it was, I think, another 5 years before I wrote Empire Land.
And you, the first book therefore was a memoir. The second was a novel. And did you find the novel a lot easier to write about because you're not writing about yourself?
No, I found it harder actually. I don't know why. Making stuff up should be easier because you're making it up, but I found it's the hardest thing I ever did.
Yeah.
And like, just technically, I find it hard to imagine fictional scenarios. And I think I'm just so based in journalism and nonfiction. I found it very difficult, but it was a very satisfying thing to do.
And do we know roughly which month that Marriage Material is going to be on the stage?
Yeah, yeah, it's on in May, and I think it's on in London. It's also going to be on in Birmingham. So yeah, hopefully people will go and see it.
Incredible. And are we allowed to know where it's going to be showing, or will that be announced later?
Yeah, yeah, it's at the Hammersmith. Is it the Lyceum? I probably got the theatre wrong now, and it's going to be on at the Birmingham Rep as well.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. And then after that, so you've gone from memoir to novel to history.
Yeah, and there's there's I guess TV, documentaries, radio, screenplays and plays. Oh, and yeah, and always say if you want to make it in the creative industries, don't do what I do because you should really do one thing really well, become successful at it, and keep repeating yourself. That's how you make it.
But you've
Most,
made it, Satnam. So how is
well, I
that?
think the writers who really do well are J.K. Rowling, Ben McIntyre. They do versions of the same thing, but I don't know what I think. It just makes me feel like I'm dying if I'm repeating myself. So I like to feel excitement that a new project begins. And actually, my next book, which I can't tell you about precisely, but it's got nothing to do with any of those. It's a
Wow.
completely different genre.
Well, I think that keeps everyone that's been following your career. It keeps the interest because actually you're constantly pivoting, and we don't know which direction you're going to go to next. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about Empire Land. What made you decide to choose empire as a topic? And was it quite hard to write about it as son of immigrants, and to sort of write about it objectively as well?
Yeah, it was a complete accident to be honest. I was working on a novel about one of the first Indian men who ever came to Britain in the 18th century, Dean Mohammed. Really interesting guy, funny guy, and I was just researching the background of his life, and he came from India with the East India Company to Ireland and then London. And I was looking into the East India Company, and it struck me that the history was really interesting, and also that no one knew it. Like I didn't know it. Even people who did history I knew didn't know about it. So I thought, you know what, I should. It just became a kind of a book trying to explain the British Empire. But I remember doing a reading very early on before I finished it, and no one really understood what it was. Like, was it a memoir? Was it a history book? But I'm not a historian. It just confused people. But then, just before I finished it, Black Lives Matter happened, and all the stuff I'd been writing about was suddenly headline news. So it was just accidentally timely.
And it was, I think it was quite fascinating because I grew up in the UK and I didn't really know much about the colonial history. And when I would go to, I remember I was in India and I think I sort of quoted Winston Churchill, and someone said, "Do you have any idea about the Bengal famine?" And I didn't. And
Yeah, it's not
and
uncommon. Not uncommon.
and then all of a sudden, so I started going to India quite a lot over the last sort of 15 years, and I started seeing sort of the history, the UK sort of India sort of history from their lens, which was so starkly different to how I was educated in the UK. So, but often I find when you push out a narrative that is different to what people have been educated about, people react sometimes quite badly because it's really changing belief structures and systems that that they sort of grew up learning. How did you deal with the backlash?
Yeah, I mean it's been intense, and actually it's not just the right; it's the left too. I mean, colonialism is probably the most difficult subject in the world. People, and for someone like me, who's saying that opposite things can be true at the same time, I just get hated by both sides. But I really do believe that if you look at this very complex history hard enough, you're gonna come to that conclusion because empire was involved destruction and creation, involved slavery and anti-slavery, involved the free press and press censorship. And but yeah, it does take you into a hornet's nest of toxicity. I don't know how I mean, some cope. How did I cope? I mean, it depends on the day. Some days it's fine. Some days it's funny. Some days you're scared. Some days you call the police. That's all I can say. And yeah, I mean, it has become quite intense, which is why for my next book I am slightly stepping away from the subject for a while.
And regarding the sort of the book tours, I once did some PR for an author, and what really shocked me was how grueling the book promotional tours are. And people
Yeah, I'm
just
glad you
don't
said that
realize
actually.
that when a book, it's physically exhausting. You're traveling, you're having to sort of answer the same questions, and so what sort of have you learned over the years of promoting books in terms of how to sort of safeguard your sanity and your health? Because it is, I mean, I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked because I never had experienced like a book tour of somebody high profile, and it was relentless.
Yeah, actually, while I'm still suffering physically in that, I've been traveling a lot on a tour, and you get sick, because not only are you meeting people, people want photographs. You get very close to a lot of people, and I just always get sick, and I really struggle with that. And actually, adult books and kids books are really interesting. Kid book tours are the most insane because you might do 5 schools in one day, and there might be 300 kids in each session that you do. It's crazy. But there's so much emphasis now on the author doing that promotion. You kind of got to do it. In general, I quite like it, but that what you mentioned earlier about the backlash, I did get people coming to just shout at me as well, and that got very boring and tedious. And I realized a lot of it's to do with price. If you do
Yeah,
an event for free, like where tickets are free or tickets are say less than £10,
yeah.
people will come and say, "Oh, I'll go and just shout at Satnam and swear at him." But I find that if it's £15 or more, people don't do that. So I now try to just do events where the tickets are quite pricey.
That's brilliant. And so you've written quite a few books on empire, and I think what would be really helpful is for you to just give us a little summary about each one, because when we look at all the books that you've written, Marriage Material is quite clear. It's a novel. Boy with the Topknot, your memoir. But just in terms of the books you've written around empire.
Yeah, I guess Empire Land is about all the ways in which modern Britain itself has been shaped by the British Empire. So our politics, our finances, our psychology, our museums and cultural institutions, our statues, and so on. Empire World, which is a sequel, is about all the ways in which the British Empire shaped the planet. So the geopolitical disputes from Israel Palestine to the situation in Sudan and Nigeria, um, the all the way places that British people ended up as a result of emigration, the multiculturalism, the racism, and the racist ideas that were spread around the world, the plants and the plant technology that changed the world, all the plantations, the tea, the fact that so many Indians drink tea is because of the British. Almost no one was drinking tea in 1900 in India. If they are now drinking a lot of tea, it's because of the British. So yeah, those are the difference between those two. And I guess Stolen History is my book for young people, explaining the basics of the British Empire for kids.
And in what sort of age range? I've got a 16-year-old who I'm trying to push books towards her way, although she loves TikTok.
Yeah. Oh, books in general. I just think you can't push books at kids. I think they've got to kind of choose them. But yeah, Stolen History is age 9 to 11. Although a lot of adults I find are reading it. And my sister, one of my sisters, who lives in Canada, announced to me the other day that she'd finally read one of my books, and I was so excited. And it was Stolen History, my kid's book, not the memoir in which she features.
And what I also wanted to ask is are you still thinking of going back into sort of journalism full time, or is this now your sort of your new area where I guess people call it a bit of a portfolio career where you write, produce books, journalism, speaking gigs. It's a sort of it's a career that's increasingly open to many people, where you don't have to just choose one lane and stay in it, but actually be open to so many different opportunities.
I like the variation, but also I do. I mean, I'm basically writing one big piece a month for the Times at the moment.
Yeah.
I really like it. I used to really struggle with working alone, but now, because life is so busy, I don't worry about that so much. So
Yeah.
having a portfolio career does mean that you feel less lonely and it's less isolating. So yeah, I'd happily carry on like this. Although sometimes I feel like I should write a column. I found writing a column really satisfying, and I learned a lot about writing. But
Hmm.
it's also so hard to think, especially when writing business columns and trying to
Yeah.
write funny,
Yeah.
entertaining columns about business, because business is not funny and entertaining. It's
Yeah.
quite dry a lot of the time, and like I would have that panic every week, thinking it would sometimes take me 3 days of reading to come up
Hmm.
with one idea. Then sometimes you would just be lying around and you'd have two ideas. And I found that a maddening process.
I was going to say, it just is incredible how much input goes in order for you to then be able to produce what you do. I wanted to ask a little bit about your perspective on the race riots that the UK had in August. Did you foresee that happening? Because I think you and I are similar ages, and we obviously grew up with race riots. But in my mind, I sort of thought that was put to bed and it wouldn't be coming back again. And it was something from the 80s, and I was quite surprised. And I just wanted to know from your perspective, having spent so much time learning about empire and immigration and the relationship that the UK has around the world with its former colonies. Did you anticipate the race riots, or were you surprised?
Quite the opposite. I just feel like I've been very naive in my politics throughout my life. I thought that stuff was well over. I thought it was over in the 90s, like 80s and 90s. I mean, one of my formative memories as a kid is hiding in a Sikh temple, while racist thugs set fire to shops and houses in Wolverhampton. And I didn't think that was going to come back. And I just thought, Britain is getting more and more liberal and at ease with its diversity. And I think it is. It totally is. And I think a lot of the data bears testament to that. But the problem is social media has given a voice to these people and a platform and a way to organize. And not only that, but the most powerful men in the world, Elon Musk, are egging it on with conspiracy theories. And not only have we not found a way to deal with this, we're now inviting these people to come into Downing Street for cozy chats. If I'd started a race riot 10 years ago, I'd probably go to jail, right? But now, not only are they not going to jail, we are trying to solicit their affection. So I think we just haven't got a solution for this, and it's going to keep on happening.
And do you think one of the main drivers to this is social media and the
Totally.
decline of
Yeah.
legacy media?
Yeah, social media. I just feel that it's weird that the media is quite regulated in Britain. I guess newspapers aren't that much, but the TV news is, and actually who buys a newspaper is quite regulated. And yet there's almost no regulation of social media. And I don't understand. This stuff is destroying the mental health of our children. It's destroying jobs. It's taking away funding of local newspapers and destroying entire industries. And it's causing race riots on our streets. At what point are politicians going to get brave enough to regulate this stuff? I feel like there's the first signs of this happening in the world. So Brazil took on X, and we've got social media being regulated for young people in Australia. But I think we've got a lot to do, and I can't believe we've let this happen.
Do you think partly it's because our politicians are not so tech savvy, and therefore for them to create legislation, they need to really understand the technology and
I think
the
there's no, I don't think it's that. I think they're scared. I think
because
they're
they've got so
scared
much power, the
of
tech
how,
people.
yeah, how what Elon Musk is going to say, or God forfend, they might not build that office block in London. It's absurd. I mean, I say this as someone who's been addicted to social media in the past. It would benefit my life if I was prevented from going to social media. I could just see it improving our lives in so many ways. I think there's going to be, over the next 10 years, a massive regulation of these social media platforms. I also think people are doing it to themselves and that people are coming off. People don't want this in their lives. And I said I'm back on Blue Sky. But even that, I actually really enjoyed the last 6 months where I wasn't really on anything. And I think increasingly, I notice this more in young people than in older people. The young people in my life are barely on social media. The addicts are our generation, right? Young people, I don't know how your daughter is, but the young people in my life hate social media. They don't want to be on it. And hopefully that's going to just grow and grow.
God, I don't know. My daughter's quite into Snapchat and TikTok, but I put sort of limits on it every day, so she can only have a certain amount because it is incredibly addictive. I mean, even I went on TikTok to sort of have a look and see what it's all about, and all of a sudden it was like stepping into the wardrobe and Narnia, and sort of what I thought was 20 minutes was actually 4 hours later, and I was deep in sort of TikTok land of cute kittens and cockapoos. And
Yeah, well,
but
this is your psyche. This is what it's plugging into, and I really worry about this. It's not just young people. I think I even know writers nowadays who don't read because all they're doing is scrolling on Instagram and TikTok. It's so addictive, this stuff, and it's making it incredibly basic and stupid.
yeah, and also I think very polarizing. I've noticed even friends of mine, people around me, have become really polarized in their views and unable to even listen to a contrary sort of view without getting angry and aggressive. And just that echo chamber that these social medias create and reinforce. And I really do think it undermines social cohesion. I
Yeah,
think there's
totally. Yeah, and I think it's really important to work and live alongside people you disagree with, and that's one reason I really value working on the Times because every time I go into the office, there's a bunch of people who I know have the opposite view to me, and I value that. But I think there's an inclination now to just disappear, especially with really difficult politics. I get it. I quite want to disappear. I'd quite like to just spend all my time in the garden and talking to liberal people. It's easier, right? But it's not the way we're going to find solutions to our problems.
yeah, I think hang around with some MAGA people. Good for you. Now, I wanted to ask a little bit about what you think about the PR industry. So, you've obviously witnessed great change over the years in terms of journalism. You've seen local journalism decline. You've seen probably the numbers of journalists reduce. You've seen the PRs increase with relation to how many PRs there are for each journalist. What's your views, having worked in media and worked alongside PRs, of the industry and how it's shifted over time?
Yeah, I get annoyed when I hear journalists complaining about PRs because I feel like they're nowadays it's very collaborative and they give you stories, they help you research subject matters. They've got more resources than us sometimes to find case studies and whatever. And I feel like journalism depends on PR a lot now and relies on it. So yeah, I feel like it's a much less confrontational relationship than it was when I started. And when I started on the like working at the FT as a general reporter, and I'd hear the correspondents around me slagging off the PRs, like constantly shouting at them, telling them to fuck off. And I feel like I still hear that sometimes in the newsroom, but I feel like it's less frequent.
That's really interesting. And you mentioned something really interesting about PRs, that we often have more resources than the journalists now. And because the journalists don't have as many resources as they used to have, they're more reliant upon the information that the PRs give them. And therefore, do you think it's an ethical imperative for PRs to make sure that the information they're giving journalists is fair and balanced, factually accurate, and so forth? Because the journalists are placing a greater trust in PRs, not because they want to, but perhaps because they're forced to, because of their own sort of lack of resources.
Yeah, and also it's about access, isn't it? And also, I guess another big change that's happened in my lifetime is that a lot of the PRs are actually not only journalists; they're journalists you worked with. I find that makes it a much more collaborative relationship because they know where you're coming from because you've literally worked on the same stories together, and you know where they're coming from. And the best PRs are the ones who don't give you the line relentlessly. They give you the line, but they acknowledge that opposite things can be true at the same time, and there's some kind of real talk about the complexity of whatever you're writing about.
I've seen in the last 15 years journalists just enter the PR industry, and it's been really interesting. And I think our industry has become very enriched by journalists because they brought with them the storytelling, and also for PRs to understand from the journalist perspective that, their focus is not to make our clients look good. They're looking for a story that will resonate with their audiences. So it's been
Yeah,
fascinating.
I think those people have also enabled the PR industry to understand that it's not advertising.
Yeah, yeah.
And actually, sometimes when you get a properly a nuanced piece, in a way, that conveys your message better than one-sided nuance. Because readers are very, very intelligent. They can pick up when they're being fed PR, right? So I think nuance is really important.
Now, Sam, I'm coming to the end part where I'm going to ask you a few questions.
All right.
Right. Last question. Who is the communicator you admire most, past or present?
Um, I'm gonna be very banal. You know what? Whenever I read an interview with George Clooney, he comes across really well, and I think he's just really deeply intelligent. Also, when he was alive, I thought George Michael was really interesting about the media and like honest in a way that almost no one is at that level. So I guess two Georges.
You mentioned about George Michael being honest. Did it not take him some time to be honest about his sexuality?
Yeah, yeah, no, he took him. It took him three-quarters of his lifetime to become at ease with the media and to be honest. But then when he did become honest, he was more honest than anyone could have possibly imagined. Especially about his sex life and what it meant to be gay.
Yeah. Now, thinkers. What thinkers have had the most impact on you? So,
Oh
authors,
God,
poets, philosophers.
yeah, so many. Obviously, as you can see from the books behind me,
Yeah.
I guess with history, David Olusoga and Alan Lester, two historians who have inspired me not just by what they've written, but just by their courage. In that David just doesn't give a fuck, and I find that very inspiring. And actually, when I've been struggling, he's really kind of mentored me and helped me out. I really love the writing and work of Hilary Mantel as well. I just think there's, I don't think I'm capable of writing a single sentence that she ever wrote, and almost everything, all the nonfiction she wrote was so inspiring and true. Yeah, so those are the names I'd pick out.
podcasts. What podcasts do you enjoy listening to?
Oh yeah, I'm obsessed with this podcast called Origin Story. I'm
Yeah.
actually it's the first time I've ever become a patron of a podcast. It's Dorian Linsky and the other guy. Anyway, it's great. They go into political concepts and research them. So they investigate Zionism and do a lot explaining this word that gets thrown about, and they explain what it means. And they did a long one on Jordan Peterson. It's just an amazing podcast. I can't recommend it enough.
I'll look into it. Thanks for that. Career advice you'd give to your
Ian
youngest.
Dunt.
Oh,
That was the
India.
name. Ian Dunt. Sorry. He's going to kill me.
Okay, so career advice you'd give to your younger self, a young Satnam.
I think God, I think one of the things I really learned is that the journey is everything. And I think this is it's so true of life in that you can be so focused on the future that you don't enjoy every step. And I look back on my life, and it's not the achievements that feel amazing. It's not those things. It's not like that book deal or that award or whatever. It's actually the smaller things. It's like writing your first column. It's like, yeah, going to report in America for the first time. How exciting that felt. And the journey is everything. So learn to enjoy every single step.
I love that. You talked earlier on about mental illness in your family, schizophrenia, and it's something that you've grown up around family members, your father, your sister. How do you maintain how do you support your family first of all when they're going through, because schizophrenia obviously impacts the individual who has schizophrenia but also the family members around them, and the second is how do you think about your own mental health, and also sometimes I follow you on social media, and I see sometimes how toxic the debates can be around, especially around some of the books around empire, and I do sort of think to myself, you're so brave, because I just could never put myself out there in the way that you have, and
I
hence
think I could see you doing it. I can
no.
see you writing a memoir.
What, it would be a people pleasing memoir, like a typical PR person. It would be everyone's wonderful and everyone was great, and and I love my life. I don't know. I think getting involved in these sort of very contentious, sort of culture war-y areas, it just brings out the worst in people. And
Yeah,
just
it's pretty
just
bad.
when I look at the comments, I'm like, God, these people are dreadful. And I just sort of think, do you actually read those comments, or do you have somebody who's handling your social media for you? Because if you do read them, I think, how do you protect your mental health against that? I mean, it's
Yeah,
really.
actually, this year I've had a social media manager, which has helped a lot. Um, I've also taken social media off my phone. Why do you want something in your pocket where you get notifications from people who hate you? Why would you have that? Why would you ever invent that? And but the other thing that really helps me is Wolverhampton, to be honest, because I go home a lot, and they don't care about the things that obsess us in media London. In Wolverhampton, they normally haven't read the latest article I've written. They've not seen my tweets or seen the reaction to them or care about my books. And I find it very grounding. And yeah, I can only spend a certain amount of time there though, because then I have to come back. But I need both.
Is your mum really proud of you?
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, I'm very proud of her. She's an amazing woman. And actually, I don't, for all the Charles Dickens aspects of my childhood, I actually think I was incredibly lucky in that I had a very happy childhood. Surrounded hundreds of cousins, and also I was always adored by my mum, and that continues. So I'm very lucky to have had that. And you meet people in life, and they're unhappy, and they're bitter, and they're cynical, and I always find almost always they were deprived of love as a child. I think that is the ultimate poverty. I never had that.
I think that's so true and often overlooked. People think about material aspects in terms of childhood, and whilst that's important, I think the emotional love that children get from children from their parents. I think that also is a form of haves and have-nots as well. Satnam, thank you so much for such a fascinating conversation and sharing your journey with our community. And thank you for listening. You'll find this episode on the PRCA's YouTube channel and on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, alongside other episodes. If you like what you hear, please do share so we can grow our community. And any feedback, please reach out to our producer, David Olajide. His contact email is in the information section. We publish interviews every 2 weeks, so please stay tuned as we have some inspiring stories in the pipeline. And finally, just a question for you, Satnam, other than huge thank you. If people want to know more about you, how can they find you? Is it your website or socials? Where do you publish information?
I'm so glad you said that. I realized while you're saying that, I was like, I failed to do my own PR. I've got the paperback of Empire World is coming out in January, so please do buy that. But yeah, on my website, sathnam.com, laughably, there's all the events I'm doing. I'm doing a tour, and there's the tickets for Marriage Material and information about my books and so on.
Fantastic. And your book that's coming out in January, can people pre-order it?
Of course, yes, they can pre-order it, yes. And I'm doing a tour of multiple cities across Britain where I will be probably getting the flu and COVID at the same time. Please come with your germs.
And so if people want to know where all these events are, they just go on your website and it's got the full list of your tour, and that's going to kick off in January.
Yeah, it's kicking off.
And tickets are already being sold, so they can.
Yeah, some of them are already sold out, so book early.
Fantastic. I will make sure that I come along as well with my germs. So, Satnam, thank you so much.
My pleasure.